It's been quite some time since I've made the bread with a soaker. A soaker is a mix of seeds and or grains, which are soaked in hot or cold liquid in order to make them softer. There are a couple of good reasons for using soakers in bread making. Some grains must be soaked, otherwise they may be inedible. Some nuts may be too hard or chunky to slice through if not soaked, which may result in the bread tearing when cut. Seeds and grains will absorb water from the dough, drying it out. Soaking them beforehand will prevent that. Soakers also help the bread retain more moisture for longer, which will increase its shelf life. It's not just about practicality, they can also be super tasty. You can find a whole dedicated video about soakers in the Principles of Baking playlist. But let's just get on with this beautiful loaf. Let me show you how it's made, starting with the ingredients. We'll need some white bread flour, whole wheat bread flour, whole grain rye flour, yeast, salt, water. For the soaker, we'll need some anise seed, fennel seed, caraway seed, roasted hazelnuts, golden raisins, and millet. Of course, you can customize it to your taste. As for the equipment, we'll need a bowl, scales, a dough scraper, a temperature probe, something to slash the dough with. I'll use my razor blade. You can also use a sharp knife. I'll be using a banneton for proofing. This one measures at 9 inches or 23 centimeters long. You can also use a round banneton. If you don't have a bread basket at all, you can use a bowl lined with a cloth, or even a large cake tin, or just bake this bread in a tin, make a sandwich loaf out of it. I'll be baking mine in my cast iron combo cooker. It will trap the steam inside, helping the bread expand and give it a nice crispy crust. But it's not necessary, you can just bake it on a tray. But at the least you could spray it down with water. A water spray bottle is a really great tool for the baker. Okay, let's get to it. Let's start by making the soaker. To get more flavor out of my ingredients, I decided to toast some of them. So in go all the seeds and the millet in a small pan. Place it on high heat and toast it for around 2 minutes. Then grab a small bowl, combine the roasted hazelnuts, the raisins, and once the seeds are nice and toasty and smoky, add them to the bowl, and then pour in the boiling water. I'm using boiling water because the millet does require some cooking. We could make a cold soaker if it was just seeds. As soon as we start adding some harder ingredients like grains, it will require boiling water. And anyhow, it's quicker this way. I'll leave the soaker to sit for around 2 hours. This will give enough time for the seeds and the grains to absorb the water and for it to cool down. Moving on, strain all the water out of the soaker. You can also leave the soaker to sit overnight. You can easily prepare it a day ahead of time. You can even leave it in the fridge. Just be aware that it will affect the dough temperature a little bit. And speaking of temperature, let's move on to making the dough. My kitchen was around 22 degrees Celsius or 72 degrees Fahrenheit, so I'm just using room temperature water. As we mix and handle the dough, it should warm up a little bit. Right, grab a large bowl, pour the water into it, add the salt, the yeast, the whole wheat bread flour, the whole grain rye flour, also known as dark rye flour, then add the soaker as well. And then give it all a good mix to ensure that the salt is completely dissolved. Then finally, add the white bread flour, grab your dough scraper and mix it to a dough. We're aiming for a final dough temperature of around 23 to 25 degrees Celsius or 73 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. You can make this bread on the same day if you want to, but I'm going to cold ferment it. At room temperature, the bulk fermentation will take around an hour and a half, and halfway through that you want to give it a fold. But cold fermentation improves the flavor and the texture, and it makes the dough easier to handle and work with. And it doesn't take a lot of planning to do it either. Okay, my dough is fully mixed, the temperature looks just about right. Now it can be covered, popped in the fridge for 30 minutes to cool down. After the 30-minute timer is up, we pull the dough back out of the fridge and give it its first and only fold. Folding replaces kneading in a recipe like this, and it also helps to cool down the dough more evenly. And here's a totally mess-free way of doing it. Wet your hands with water, pick the dough out of the bowl, then fold the sides down and push them back up into the center. Imagine that you're folding it on the table, but upside down. Keep going around in a circle until the dough ball is nice and tight. Place it back into the bowl, cover it up, and place it back into the fridge for the long cold fermentation of around 18 to 24 hours. And on the next day, it should be nice and bubbly, just like this. Now at this point the dough is very loose. It has been sitting in the fridge for so long that the gluten has completely relaxed. So before we can do the final shaping, we must pre-shape it. Otherwise the loaf won't keep its shape. Give it a generous dusting of flour. Scrape it out of the bowl with a smooth side down on the table, flatten it, and fold the edge over the middle whilst go around in a circle until you reach point where you started. Then flip the dough with the smooth side up again, tighten it against the table, that's your pre-shaping done, nice and tight. Now cover it up so it doesn't dry out, and leave it to rest for 30 minutes. The dough will relax during this time and also start warming up. And after we perform the final shaping, the temperature should be nice and even throughout, and the loaf should be nice and tight again. Okay, to perform the final shaping, dust the dough with flour, release it from the table, place it with the smooth side down, then flatten it out. Now take the top 2 corners and cross them over in the middle. This will create a pointy piece at the top. Grab the pointy piece and fold it down into the center. Now turn the dough 180 degrees and repeat the same steps on the other side. This will create 2 pointy bits at the left and the right. You want to fold those into the center too. Finally, dust your hands with flour and roll the loaf up nice and tight. And if need be, pinch the seam together at the bottom. Now usually people put flour in the bread basket to stop the loaf from sticking to it. I prefer to do it slightly differently. I dust the loaf with flour instead. So give it a good coating all around and then place it in the bread basket with the smooth side down and the seam side pointing up. Now cover it so it doesn't dry out and leave it for the final proof, which will take around 1 hour. My kitchen was pretty cool, but it was rising just fine. Start preheating your oven during the last 15 minutes of the final proof to 220 degrees Celsius or 430 Fahrenheit fan on, or 240 Celsius, which is 465 Fahrenheit fan off. And also preheat your baking vessel if you're using one. Okay, this baby is puffed up, looks ready for the oven. So let's get it in there. Put on your oven gloves, get the hot pan out, place it on a trivet or something so you don't burn your table. Leave the lid on the cooker for now. Then pick up the bread basket, but don't drop the loaf in straight away. To release it from the basket, or to at least make sure that it's not stuck to it, move it around gently and let it hang down. Once you are positive that it's loose, you can place it in the pan. Brush off any excess flour, grab your razor or a very sharp knife and give it a nice slash. You can cut a little design in there if you want to, but I like the simplicity of the single slash. Okay, let's get the lid on, let's get this pan in the oven. The initial bake will take 30 minutes. After 30 minutes, remove the pan from the oven, remove the lid, enjoy the view for a second, and then pop it back into the oven for another 10 minutes of baking, or until you are happy with the color of the crust. And this looks just about done to me. And there you have it. That's how I make a hazelnut and raisin bread with a soaker. It's a beauty, isn't it? And I can tell you that my kitchen is full of a beautiful aroma right now. The crust is crackling as the loaf is cooling down, and I'm very happy with the result here. This bread has a crispy crust, a super soft interior, it's nice and moist. The soaker brings all kinds of flavors in there. The plump sweet raisins just pop as you eat them. The toasted hazelnuts still have a little crunch to them. A little bit of whole wheat, a little bit of whole rye. They add a nice flavor too. And the best part is that you can customize this recipe to your taste. Use any seeds and grains that you like. Just don't use very hard grains because they won't cook. You can add some different nuts to it. You can add different dried fruits instead of raisins. Swap the rye flour for some einkorn or for some spelt, or even make it 100% white. It's up to you. Just don't forget to check out the whole grain bread playlist.